Thanks for coming, everyone. It's nice to see you here.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. It's been a very interesting journey for me, so I'm really happy to share the stuff that I know. I guess the starting point.
Thank you.
The starting point by way of introduction is that I studied pretty traditional, in fact, extremely traditional yoga in India for a long time, and I never really. I am a teacher and internationally certified for everything you could possibly imagine, but I never really wanted to teach rooms full of people, which, in any case, isn't how yoga is traditionally taught. It's traditionally taught one-to-one because each person has different needs, and you have to adapt the practices for each person in the traditional way of doing things. And I guess the starting point is like to disambiguate, is that a word? Yoga.
Yep.
What is yoga? Not you, that's for sure. Get in your bed. So there is in fact a definition, and the definition in the Yoga Sutras is yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is stopping the whirlpools of the mind. And essentially, yoga is a self-cultivation practice, not dissimilar from Taoist practices and stuff that Daryl's familiar with. And if you read the Yoga Sutra, you will see it says precious little about the physical practice. It says actually 2 words, which we will come to, and a whole lot about managing what's in your head. So how would all of that end up applying to people in the situation where they're missing a limb or 2 or more? Well, essentially you can't still your mind if you've got all sorts of problems, if you're in a great deal of pain and discomfort, if you're unhealthy, so the list goes on. And so the practices of yoga cover an enormous range of the sort of things that disturb people. And unsurprisingly, getting our bodies feeling comfortable enough to sit still for a while is a big part of that puzzle. So that's where diet, all the asta practices, the physical practices that you see people doing come in, where the breathing practices come in. And by the way, the bits that very rarely get mentioned, the first 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga about living helpfully, I suppose would be a way of putting it, in society, and treating yourself properly. They're the really important parts to get started. But adapting the yoga practices that are specifically to do with physical body and our mental state gives us a huge amount of scope. And really what I did when I found myself in hospital for an extraordinarily long period of time was first of all use those practices to survive the exercise myself. Obviously the meditation practices, the breathing practices, and adapted the physical ones. And it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that I was doing quite a whole lot better than a lot of the other people who were stuck in the same place with me. And so here we are 2 years later, because I just decided, well, I better share this with some people. And ended up getting a phone call from Daryl, and now I'm talking to you. So where we're going to start is we need to do any of this properly, we need to relax. Right? We need to have, as my Buddhist wife would say, we need to have relaxed minds. And from the point of view of the Western description of that state, what we need to do is suppress the activity of our sympathetic nervous system. So that's our fight and flight response, yeah? Everybody got some idea what I'm talking about? And when the sympathetic nervous system is engaged because you're under threat, all sorts of things happen to your body which aren't actually particularly helpful to your long-term well-being. So we can start with your prefrontal cortex. That part of your brain there shuts down. It takes half a tic-tac a minute to run this thing. And you don't need to think if you're running away from a tiger. You just need to get out of there. So our prefrontal cortex shuts down. Have you ever been so nervous you can't think? If you've ever been in that state, that's exactly what's happened. But other things happen to us as well. Our sense of pain is increased. The sense of pain is related to our fear, and that makes perfectly good sense from the point of view of the purpose of the sympathetic nervous system. It hurts, we want to get away from it. Also, blood stops being focused in the core of our body. It goes to our arms and legs so we can run away or win the fight. Our digestion becomes significantly less effective, and our body's healing shuts down because the energy is being poured into being able to either get away from whatever the threat is or win the fight. Now that's really a very useful thing. We wouldn't have survived as creatures without it. If you're being threatened by, a dog or whatever, but it's not particularly helpful, and we certainly didn't evolve with our sympathetic nervous systems engaged all the time. So it's not helpful in dealing with not being able to pay the mortgage, for example. But it's a fairly blunt instrument, and it does engage. And it engages with all of those things I just said. Of course, when it's engaged, the other side of our autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, is disengaged. And that's responsible for healing, good digestion, blah, 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 right? So that's the good guy. So essentially, at its simplest, the practice of yoga is about suppressing the sympathetic nervous system and engaging in some activities that keep us healthy so that our parasympathetic nervous system can engage and do all the good things it does, okay? And the practices have been around for at least 5,000 years. There are statues from the Indus River Valley civilization of people doing various yoga postures, asana. And in fact, when we look at the social rules of Vedic culture from the Indus River Valley, if you committed a crime, you were sentenced to meditation for 30 days. So they had some idea of what they were talking about, and they've had a long time to develop this stuff in response to all sorts of issues. So what I'm doing is taking the principles of yoga and applying them to core things that affect amputees. First of all, there's some degree of stress. There is some degree of disorientation. Your body is inherently asymmetrical. Things just aren't quite the same, especially in the early days. We have to deal with pain quite frequently. And from a physical standpoint, even if we're doing really well with a prosthetic leg or a prosthetic arm, every move we make is inherently asymmetrical. I've got one expensive technological leg and one cheapo biological leg, and they obviously work completely differently. To make this thing work, I've got to do different things to make this thing work. So during the day, I become increasingly asymmetrical. That's going to affect my back. Muscles will be stronger, different muscles will be stronger. And over time, regardless of how well we're getting on, we will end up less symmetrical, pressure on different parts of our body that didn't evolve to deal with those pressures, and we end up with secondary dramas. Hello. So for example, I have a friend, she was born without an arm. So you would think she gets on perfectly well, but she just had an operation to do with a whole lot of issues with the shoulder and her back, simply because over the course of her life she'd become increasingly asymmetrical and the joints wore out because they weren't being used as they evolved to be used. There are other things, you know, if you've got a sore back, if you've got tension, you're not going to feel good and you're not going to function properly. So what doing yoga for amputees means fundamentally is doing some stuff to get symmetrical that doesn't require having 4 limbs that match, and doing some stuff so that we can manage our mood.
Okay, great.
And the very, very core of all yoga practice is breathing. So I talked about the sympathetic nervous system. If you want to, it's pretty dumb, by the way. It's a blunt instrument. So if you breathe as though you weren't stressed, your sympathetic nervous system will shut down. If you breathe like you're sleeping, in a very short amount of time, your sympathetic nervous system will disengage, you will feel less anxious, you'll feel a bit brighter, blah, blah, blah. And that boils down to breathing out for about twice as long as you breathe in. And it really is as simple as that. When we're doing the physical practices, we tend to breathe in and out about the same length of time. But when we're just sitting, we exhale for longer than we inhale, and we're able to get control of ourselves. Now, there's a really straightforward, normal thing that you do that leverages this part of our human biology all the time, and it's sighing. Just think about it. What you do, you come home, it's been a bugger of a day, you sit in the lounge and you go, oh. Largely what we're doing with the breathing is simply formalising that sigh. So the other part of the breathing is it has an enormous impact on our torso. Unsurprisingly, lungs take up a fair bit of it. So when we're breathing, what we'll be practicing doing is first of all locating this heart centre. It's in the middle, centre of your chest, and breathing into that. You will find as you do, if you focus on breathing in the centre, your chest will expand, and if you haven't been practicing, oh, hang on, if I don't think about it, it's a little bit more one side than the other, and when you get it central, you will be readjusting your back and all the things that relate to it. Then, if we start to exhale from what we'll call the pelvic centre, because every tradition's got a different name for this thing, Dantian I like because I'm a Taoist and that's the Chinese word, and at least it's specifically there. It's often referred to as the navel chakra, which is nowhere near the navel, but let's just call it the pelvic centre. So we're talking about somewhere about 3 or 4 fingers below our navel, but in the centre of the body. So if I breathe in to my heart centre, and then gently contract and start my exhalation from this pelvic centre, I'm naturally strengthening my core muscles, straightening my spine, and reducing the activity in my sympathetic nervous system. So that's really what we're going to focus on as a practice. And what we're going to try and learn today is a thing called Ujjayi breathing, which is just Sanskrit for throat breathing, but it sounds fancier if you say the Sanskrit. So that we can consciously extend the exhalation. And really what Ujjayi breathing is simply the same as intoning a sound, except we're not making a sound. And we'll go through the steps to get there. But if you think about yourself, anyone here a singer?
No.
You'll notice, like, you notice people go to church, they come out feeling better, and, you know, maybe it wasn't because Father Bloggs preached the best sermon, whatever, but they've all stood up 3 times, generally in a normal Orthodox kind of environment, and had a jolly good sing, and they all feel a great deal better. So, if you think about everything I've just said, then think about how my out-breath is going to be if I just intone an R sound. So I'm happy to make a fool of myself, and it goes a bit like this. And you can see, just from doing this very normal human thing of making a tone, how I can control the smooth exhalation. Yeah? So what we're going to start doing, first of all, is going to breathe in here. And the idea is when you breathe in, get the sensation that the pressure is as much on your spine as it is on your chest. Okay? And when you're breathing in, maximum like 80% of your full capacity. We're not trying to stress ourselves. All of this is done gently. And I guess before we start, I'll add this piece. It must be done gently. If we do anything that's going to cause a sharp pain or significant discomfort, our muscles will contract to protect that area, and it's exactly the opposite to what we're trying to achieve. So, no force, okay? That's really important. And when we get to doing any physical practices, but even in breathing, the maximum sensation is a strong, comfortable stretch, okay? And if you get all flustered, just stop and start again. So, if you breathe in to your centre of your chest, that's sort of about here, and just breathe in so that you feel the pressure on your spine as much as you do on your chest. So just sit up, breathe in. And see if you can breathe into that heart centre. The next step is gently contract the muscles of your lower abdomen, and I mean gently at this stage, so that you can start your exhalation. If you do that, you will find you can exhale for significantly longer than if you're just chest breathing. So we start to breathe in here, gently contract these muscles, and start to exhale from here. It's like squeezing the air out from the bottom. So have a go at that. Just 2 or 3 times. Inhale into the chest, trying to keep as symmetrical as possible. Just a little bit of actively engaging the muscles in your lower abdomen, and start to exhale. Just see how everyone's going. Cool. Looking good. Now, for those of us who are missing lower limbs, this gives us an extra benefit when we're trying to do movement, because with this contraction of these muscles in our lower abdomen, concentrate on getting the weight even on our seat bones. So when I exhale and do that slight contraction, make sure that my seat bones are sitting evenly. I can't rely on my legs. A lot of our balance and our symmetry comes from feedback from the nerves in our feet. Well, that's not going to do me any good because I'm missing one. So if we translate our focus to our seat bones, as we exhale, we're going to make sure that our pelvis is straight and out, supporting our weight evenly. And by doing so, we're also going to start working on these core muscles, and that's also really helpful. So just a couple of times, intentionally, breathe in, and drop your chin a bit too. I'll show you a picture about that in a second. It's my favourite picture. But just drop your chin so that you're stretching your neck a little bit, not forcefully. Inhale here. See if we can get even weight on our seat bones, and exhale. Don't lock your jaw. If you have a tendency to lock your jaw, stick your tongue between your teeth. Okay. So, how did you get some idea of that feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
And if you focus on getting it in a straight line, get the idea that the exhalation is a straight line between the contraction of the muscles here in the dead center and the center of your chest, you'll find you're using all sorts of muscles gently, but you're using them to make that exhalation feel like it's straight. And so we're going to be also gently but consistently working on our core muscles. And it's far more productive than trying to do seriously hardcore exercise to build your core muscles, because especially if you've got a little bit of age on you, and like anyone over 25 I'm talking about here, you stand a very good chance of hurting your lower back. Okay? And that's going to be the basis for a whole lot of stuff that we do. So, for extending that out breath so that we get ourselves nice and relaxed, the first thing to do is hum. Okay? So, inhale, and then as you exhale, just hum. Very good. We'll do it again. Inhale. Even weight, gentle contraction, hum. Very good. Now, immediately you did that, you've noticed that you've controlled your exhalation, yeah? It's obvious. That's exactly what making a tone is about. So the next step is to do that without making a noise. So what you do, still contracting your vocal cords, which is what we're doing when we're humming, but instead you make a rasping noise, and you can hear that. People say I'm very loud when I do this. You may or may not be able to hear it, but I'll try and give you a demo. Probably couldn't hear it, I'm a bit far from the mic, but all I'm doing is doing what I would do if I'm humming but not making the noise. You just make a rasping noise. Okay? It's very, very useful because you can then focus on that rasping noise, and all of a sudden, not only are we doing some things that are good for breathing, but we're actually started the whole process of meditation, because your fundamental meditation technique is to sit squarely on your bum, balanced on your spine, and focus on your breathing. Listen to that sound. So see if you can get that to happen. Just with your chin gently down, inhale, and then sort of make that rasping noise. As you exhale.
Is that right?
How did you feel? The most important thing is not whether I think you made the right sound, but whether you felt like you're in control of your exhalation without getting tense. Okay? Without crunching your jaw up, without getting a sore neck, right? If you're able to control your exhalation without getting stressed, you're a long way down the track already. You'll find you can use this for all sorts of things. And it's really great because it doesn't matter where you are, you can do it. You know, you can't sort of do asana practice in the middle of the bus, for example. But anywhere you are, you're a bit stressed, you know, your breath is always with you. And you can always just spend a bit of time extending the exhalation. So the idea is to listen to it, breathe in, breathe out, like I said, and we're going to add some counting. So I'm going to breathe in, let's say to a count of 4. And just to make it easy, I'll breathe out to a count of 6.
Can I ask, this is silly, but when you're breathing out, are you breathing out through your nose or your mouth?
Always through your nose, unless it's sort of blocked.
Okay, so nose, all right.
All your breathing in this case is through your nose, but
Through your nose.
it's really important that we, that's quite important, but it's really important not to get hung up on anything. You know, if your nose is horribly blocked and all the rest of it, that's not going to help, right? And I think one of the things I see with modern commercial yoga is people get hung up on doing exactly the perfect right practice and touching their toes correctly or sticking their toe in their ear or whatever. It's not about doing the practice perfectly. It's a process. Some days are better than others. So if you can breathe out of your nose, by all means, do that. If you can't, well, you're going to have to breathe in and out your mouth anyway. You can do it this way. Okay, so the idea of counting is to see that we've got a regular breath, and that has a huge impact on your nervous system and the way you feel. Right, so if you breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, slower than that. The regulation of your breath sends a message to your brain that, oh, things must be okay. All right. Now, of course, there are a lot of different ways of counting. The traditional way is with a mantra, which you say silently. You can count just as I did, counting 1 to 6. My favourite way of getting things perfect is to use my metronome. And when that was first introduced to me by my yoga teacher, that you can use a metronome to, you know, we slow it down a bit, to regulate the breathing. So we practice this stuff, you know, you can imagine now we are all being earnest yoga students in India, and we'd practiced our breathing and we thought we'd done all right. And Mohan brought out the metronome and we did the practice to the metronome, and with the absolute regularity of the metronome, the power of the practice was just extraordinarily improved. So the lesson there is the more regular we can have the breathing, the better effect it's going to have on us emotionally. The more centrally we can breathe, the better effect it's going to have on our spine, the symmetry of our core. And when your core muscles are reasonably strong, your collarbone is perpendicular to your spine and your pelvis is perpendicular to that, really anything you're hanging off your torso is going to work a lot better. And that fundamentally is the principles that we're working on. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how this works with that sympathetic nervous system doodad we were talking about before. So the nerves of your sympathetic nervous system run through the middle of your back. And the nerves of your parasympathetic nervous system, that's the good guy, run through your neck and your lumbar spine, hence parasympathetic nervous system. Well before people knew what these things actually did, they recognised there were these different sets of nerves. So it might then start to make some sense why, when people sit to meditate or when we're doing this breathing, we want to straighten out our neck, and when we contract these muscles, we gently rotate the pelvis back a little bit, putting pressure on pin bones, because what we're doing is allowing the nerves of the parasympathetic nervous system to be nice and straight and do their job as well as they possibly can. So I'll show you a sort of a really good do and don't picture. This is one of my favourites. Oh, here we go. Because I see a lot of mistakes made when people try to do a yoga posture and sort of make it look right. So this is my favourite don't lose your head picture. Okay, this guy is Sri T. Krishnamacharya. He's my teacher's teacher, and without any shadow of a doubt, the single most important teacher of yoga last century. He studied in the Himalayas for a long time. Chinese took over, he came to Chennai, and he's responsible for teaching the guy that started Ashtanga Yoga. Iyengar of Iyengar Yoga is his brother-in-law, and the list just goes on. Okay, Krishnamacharya knew his stuff. A lot of times, the other picture that I've said with the circle with the cross line, which means that's what you don't do, that's actually the cover of a book, which is for back pain. And I can only assume it's a book for how to get back pain. But very, very often you will see people doing yoga, and when they think they're doing a back bend, they will be doing this. And I don't know how many times while I was practicing I would hear Mohan in the background, "You're a yoga student, don't lose your head." So having a look at Krishnamacharya's position there, you can see what we're trying to achieve. It's not by force, but we're trying to straighten our neck, slightly straighten our lumbar spine, and in the traditional texts, they say it's like, tightening a vina string. So a vina is a stringed instrument. So it's like tightening a guitar string. You sort of heads down a little bit and you rotated your pelvis. And the idea is you're straightening out your spine. So when I say drop your head when you're doing the breathing, there's a really good reason for it. I'll get rid of this guy. Groovy software is for doing all this fun stuff. So at the moment, really, until we meet again, at which time we'll discuss the stuff. So the format here is, I've just given you some information and you've done a little bit of practice. And it's not going to work if I then move on next week, presuming you've got this right. The idea is, at some time, at least once a day, definitely as a good teacher I'll tell you to do it twice, and you won't. So at least once a day, for 12 or so repetitions, practice that exercise. Simply breathing in here, relaxing the head, looking down really helps the whole head thing. Just look at the ground. Breathe in, get some pin bones even, and start your exhalation from here. And make it as straight a line as you can, and breathe in again. Very good. And you will find that this practice will build, and it will build, and it will be the foundation of everything that we do. Even the really exciting things like a headstand with the extreme contractions called bandhas, which are, you know, the 3 locks of your body to lock energy, all sorts of groovy stuff. It all comes from getting this breathing right. If you can get this right, you're going to naturally set your spine up right. You're going to naturally set your pelvis right. And then for any of us who are lower limb amputees, when we stand up, we can think about this centre point and have it as the centre point for our balance, and we're immediately going to be able to get ourselves organised on our prosthesis in a really nicely balanced way. So that's the deal. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
And it's like, that's the magic secret. So
Okay.
if you're not doing that and you're doing exercises, you're just doing exercises. And I want to leave you with a really important thing. So when I said the physical practices, the Yoga Sutras say 2 words. They are sthira and sukha. So strength and flexibility. It's supposed to be balanced. And then the next line says it should be done with the relaxation of effort. And I want you to take that and tattoo that on the back of your eyelids. We're not trying to struggle and strain and achieve something. We're trying to allow our body to come into a naturally healthy position and gradually improve our physical and our mental state.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
End of lesson.
Thank you. Thank you.